Hi, I'm Wang from BloombergNEF. Can everyone hear me? Okay, awesome. So thank you for joining our panel today. We're going to be discussing how public charging networks are expanding to make EV ownership more convenient and accessible. So to set some context, let's consider where we are today. So far this year, 1 in 10 car sales in the US have been electric, and at BNEF, we project that this is going to increase to 27% by 2030. Now, when it comes to charging, the US has over 238,000 public connectors, 46,000 of which are fast. And we project that this is going to have to increase to 168,000 by the end of the decade in order to meet the electricity demand from the US's EVs. So our panel here today is going to be discussing how we're going to be building that charging network of the future. So before we dive into questions, I'm going to introduce my panelists. To my left, we have Marcy Bauer, who is the Senior VP of Customer Experience and Funding at EVgo. Then we have Cantor, who's the Research Director at ZETA, Seth Cutler, CEO at IONNA, and Alexander Schleicher, who is the Head of E-Mobility at BMW. So thank you so much for joining me here today. Why don't we dive into the questions? All right, so my first question is for Corey. Corey, can you kick us off by telling us a little bit about what you do at ZETA, and then explaining what ZETA's vision is for 2030 when it comes to charging and where federal funding can maybe most be needed?
Well, Ash, first off, it's really good to be here. I hope everyone can hear me back there. So my name is Cantor. I am ZETA's research. Can you hear me? Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me in the back? No, you still can't hear it. Okay, there we go. All right, guys. Good morning. My name is Cantor. I'm ZETA's research director. I've been with the firm back since January, and I serve basically helping our organization to bring the right data, statistics, and messaging to the EV transition. ZETA is based down in Washington, D.C., so the organization represents the EV automakers like Rivian, Lucid, and Tesla, as well as many of our battery manufacturers and EV charging folks, such as EVgo over here. And then in terms of where we see things going next, I think we're entering a new phase of the overall EV market, Ash, and so thinking about the future of the National EV Infrastructure Program, or NEVI, what funding looks like not just over the period of years that are owed, but over the next 5 years. And what we actually need the federal government to do, because many of the private sector groups like EVgo, like IONNA, have really been stepping in and stepping up in terms of meeting the EV charging needs of consumers. But how can we target federal funding to help assist and meet the kind of needs in the network where there are gaps, such as rural charging or medium and heavy duty charging? So looking forward to 2030, I think you know the data better than me in terms of our projections, but we're going to need a lot more private sector work and a lot more federal investment to kind of help consumers feel comfortable to drive their electric vehicles anywhere here in the U.S.
And is there anything that ZETA has been researching in terms of unblocking things like grid connections and permitting to accelerate EV charger deployment?
I mean, ZETA as an organization has been working towards permitting reform. In terms of the grid, there's a lot of different aspects of the grid that are worth looking into. But kind of moving Congress forward on permitting could make a big difference. And the Transportation Reauthorization Bill, which is coming up next year, to kind of ensure that NEVI is meeting future needs of the network is pretty vital. So that's where most of our focus has been from a policy perspective on charging. When you look at why consumers are still hesitant to buy EVs, charging is the number 2 reason still brought up. And so as a trade association, we want to really be out there to make sure that consumers are getting more comfortable and that policy is supporting the build out of the charging network, whether it's through federal investments or the kind of permitting and time to use that money. I think that's been a big challenge with NEVI to date, is that it's taken a long time for funding already allocated to even be obligated and then the chargers to be built out.
Thank you, Corey. Thanks for your perspective on the policy piece. Now I'd like to learn a little bit more about the customer experience side of things when it comes to charging. So this next question is for Alex. Can you speak a little bit more about what a great charging experience means for drivers and how BMW might be integrating that process into its vehicles?
Of course, happy to. I think I want to bring the public charging side a little bit more into context. So still in 2024, 85% of all the charging sessions that happened to BMW customers were actually home charging sessions. And I always compare it with like charging your smartphone. I mean, I'm always the person who charges my smartphone overnight and I'm good to go for the full day. I have my sister. She always basically runs around with a plug in her hand and trying to find the next plug to charge it. I have my wife. She never has a charging cable and always has to borrow one from someone else. And then I have my dad. He's from Germany. He visited me recently. He brought 1 pair of shoes for 3 weeks, but 5 power banks to just be on the safe side. So I think it's not the one charging use case, what I want to say with that. It's like all the charging use cases, and it's a different collection of charging use cases for the individual customers. When it comes to public charging, I think more specifically from a customer experience, I think it's the composition of all the touch points customers have when they charge somewhere. So we at BMW are thinking about it from the very first moment people start thinking about going on a trip or driving somewhere. So I think they don't want to plan ahead. I think they just want to have the comfort to like sit in the car, go in the car, and know that whatever destination I put in there, I'm going to be guided in the right direction. I'm going to be guided to the right charging stops. Then when I basically go there, that I know when I come to that charging stop that station is actually going to be available and that it's a high quality charging station where charging is actually going to work. Then obviously the on-site experience needs to be on top, and I think on-site it's about the little things, right? It's not just about sticks in the ground. I think it's about providing canopies. It's about providing retail opportunities, similar to like what people have at a gas station or even more than that. I think then customers need to be they need to know that when I plug in my charger, it's actually working and I don't have to try it 5 or 6 times to get it started. So I think plug and charge is a big portion of that from a convenience point of view. And then if people are leaving the stations, can I use all of that data I just created as a customer to kind of inform my next e-route about how successful it's going to be or where I should be charged because I worked there and the charging experience was perfect. So I think we try to integrate it end to end, and I think that's actually what's going to make the difference for the customer.
Okay, thank you. That's great. And I know that we've been seeing in the news a lot of automakers are announcing adopting NACS plugs, like Tesla's charging standard. And so where's BMW on that?
So we are certainly going to adapt it. We will basically start offering access to our vehicles by the end of this year, and we will also see the first vehicles coming out with a native NACS plug by the end of this year. Okay,
got it. Thank you. And now pivoting to the customer experience from the operator side of things, we have EVgo and IONNA on this panel. So I'd like to know what are some frustrations that EV drivers are reporting with charging, and what are your networks doing to address those? And so let's start with Marcy and then move to Seth after.
Yeah, I mean, I think the comments already shared are pretty spot on. The EV drivers want the chargers to be where they need them to be the fastest chargers that their vehicles can take, and beyond that, they just need to work without a whole lot of thought or effort. And so that's what EVgo is looking to address and continuously improve on, is making that a seamless experience where drivers don't need to make a lot of decisions or put a lot of thought into where they're going where they're going. There should be a charger there. There should be amenities there. The plugging in experience should be seamless. They should be able to walk away and do it, grab their coffee, use the bathroom, grab a bite, without having to think about the rest of it. And so, that's what EVgo does. We deploy public fast charging, increasingly, almost exclusively 350 kilowatt, the fastest charging experience available, which most vehicles can't even take full access of just yet. So it's again, getting it out there before they even really need it. So that they're not being limited by that charge speed, making sure that it works. We use auto charge to do that, and it's that seamless plug-in, no apps, no RFID, no credit card. You just plug it in, and your charging starts. And so that's more and more what the customer wants to experience. Pretty much what you
awesome.
said.
Yeah, I'll jump right into it then. So no, I think a quick kind of briefing on IONNA, right? Our goal is to have 30,000 charging bays live by end of 2030. I think we're well on our way of that. We've contracted over 10% of those already in the first year and a half in operation. We're over 900 bays in construction right now. And so if you look at like the early things that we deployed, it was all around deploying canopies, car care, even simple things as trash cans and squeegees. You'd be surprised when you go to a charging station today. There's a lot of luxuries you don't have as an EV driver that you have as someone who's driving an ICE vehicle. And so the first station we deployed, we said, hey, we really want to make sure that the amenities exist. So we built them, right? We went out, we bought land, we do ground leases today. And so really every decision we make for our sites and for our businesses with the driver in mind. And that really transcends itself into how we site select, how we design the sites, and how we really partner on the retail side. So you'll see that going forward as we build these locations. In some cases, we built sites without canopies to start, and we'll come back as a phase 2. We've already plumbed for the foundations for those canopies to add to it. You'll see other big announcements this year, next year around things we're doing on the retail side. We've done some partnerships with Amazon already with Just Walk Out technology, and how do we integrate that into the charging. So I think, I've been in the industry going on, I think 13, 14 years now, which kind of shows my age. But I think if you look at it, a lot of these conferences today are still around charging working. And I think when we get to a place where the conference is around way more than that in terms of the retail experience and the amenities that are provided beyond, is it going to work on the first try? Then I know that all of us in this industry were successful in terms of not just deploying infrastructure, but really providing the infrastructure that works for drivers in this market.
You bring up a good point about these amenities, and building up these charging stations must be very expensive. I mean, they're high powered, and then you're building these lounges and stuff. So I'm curious, you're backed by these major automakers. Do they think about profitability differently because they're building charging and they're able to sell more cars because of that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that is very top of mind. Look, we have to make sure that charging can be successful, not just in terms of reliability, but in terms of sustainable business for the long term. Otherwise, none of this will ever work. So we are very conscious of our costs, both on how we run the company, but also in terms of how much it costs to build these locations. And I can tell you, we do a lot of benchmarking on ourselves. So even with building lounges and building our own amenities and adding canopies to it, we've been really good. The team that we've assembled has been really good at driving costs out and driving cost efficiency. So we think benchmark-wise, we're on par with the rest of the industry today, even with adding in these other items into these locations.
I want to add maybe one quick thing,
Yeah,
if you
go
guys
ahead.
don't mind, because I think from an OEM perspective, obviously profitability for a charging network where you invested in is important ultimately, but I think it's not the first thing you think of. I think it's more important that you start building a network which is relevant to the customer from a size perspective, that it's high quality and is providing exactly what the customers wants on site. And I think then you have this full integration where you leverage the collaboration between the charge point operator and the OEM to actually drive customers there. And I think if you do everything right on the first 3 topics, utilization and profitability will ultimately follow.
Yeah, I just want to add too, the conditions right now in this industry are that there is huge unmet demand for public fast charging. The ratio between EVs and fast charging is high and increasing, even with all of the large-scale deployments that EVgo is doing and IONNA is doing and others are doing. It's still increasing as a ratio, and so the business case for this is very strong, and if you're smart about it, driving down those costs from top to bottom, from the way a site is installed. And I meant to thank you, Corey, right and ZETA from the top on the work that you've been doing on permitting. Spending less time on site, getting that charger to in the ground that much more quickly, so that it's serving the EV driving public more quickly. All of those things combined do help control the costs, but the demand is there and the resulting throughput is there. So the business case is strong.
The demand is definitely there, and thank you, Marcy, for bringing up the ratios. I actually have the numbers. So the ratio of public connectors to EVs in the US is 1 to 28, and the global average is 1 to 11. So the US definitely does need to be installing more chargers. And Marcy, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how EVgo is leveraging federal funding to, drive your expansion.
I mean, there's an array of funding available that is smartly aligned with where we're looking to deploy and how we're looking to deploy federal, state, utility. The entire landscape of it is on the table, and so we're not necessarily bound by any one, type of funding. We're making smart use of whatever is available, but just sort of, stubbornly going back to the main point of it, which is that ratio. the demand is there now, and so yes, the funding helps support and expand the scope of where you might install chargers, and how early you might install chargers in certain areas, which is super important. But it's not necessarily a limiting front and center kind of a driver. It's the customer that is, and where those customers are now, where we think they're going to be, because we know this is an infectious experience in a positive way. You encounter EVs yourself or through a neighbor or a colleague, that creates a little cluster of EV adoption. So we have to meet that demand, and public funding of the various different flavors is certainly part of that equation, but it's not the only part.
Gotcha. And Alex brought up earlier that it's not just about the number of sticks on the ground, but also the quality of the charging. And so I've seen some headlines in the past years about charging reliability being an issue. So I'm curious what EVgo and IONNA are doing to address those sorts of concerns.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so when it comes to reliability, how is why do you think that there were these reliability issues, and what is EVgo doing differently?
Yeah, I mean, it is an evolving technology both on the vehicle side and the charger side, so there are a lot of learnings along the way. And there are complexities that the driver does not care about, right? Like, we can go super deep on all the ways a charging session might fail, including a huge chunk that's operator error, and still things that we need to address so that there isn't the opportunity to have that error. There are things like timeout, where maybe you plug in, if you aren't using auto charge, you plug in and you get distracted by a text or an email or something, a phone call, and it takes you a little bit long to get back to starting the session. And then that, there's fraud prevention mechanisms that are you guys are already bored by that, right? Like that's not an exciting thing, and customers don't want to hear about that. We just need to fix it. And so there's all manner of software and hardware improvements and we're laser focused on this right now. We own and operate our network. It doesn't happen without customers using the network, so we have to be so focused on constantly improving that experience that they have to get to that seamless experience that we described at the very beginning.
Happy to jump in. I mean, look, we look at it, there's three things we look at. One is how often things fail, how fast you fix them, and then how easy it is for a customer to get into a session, to Marcy's point, right? And I think in terms of how easy it is for someone to get into a session, a lot of that with plug-in charge and auto charge and other things you can do from a customer experience standpoint helps a lot. So I think as a whole, the industry's moved towards a place where it's just easier to interact with these pieces of equipment. I think in terms of how often things fail, look, I think the industry as a whole is still relatively new, but it's getting older, it's maturing. So early technology typically has higher failure rates. I think as a whole, from an industry's perspective, I think we've gotten a lot better, right? The hardware's gotten a lot better, the cars have gotten better, the interaction of cars and chargers have gotten better. So I think we're all ships are rising in a higher tide situation. And then from an IONNA perspective, in addition to that, is when we look at how quickly we repair things, we've done a lot of work in terms of bringing field techs in-house, setting up parts depots local to where our charging stations are going to be, having our own techs, partnering with third parties. So we joke around that at the office that if someone needs to jump out of a helicopter with parts to make sure the charge is up the next day, we will do that. I think it's culturally, how do you drive that into an organization, to a company where if you're living that every day with the driver first in mind, what comes out of that is a high quality, high reliability experience for drivers.
I'm airborne qualified, and I have to say, in the 10 years I've been at EVgo, I've never had to jump out of an airplane to deliver a part, but maybe someday. That would be very exciting. Just one thing to add there is the other piece of it is just to be ubiquitous and to have larger and larger footprints. And I know IONNA is focused on this just like EVgo is. If one charger goes down, there's 10 others or 12 others there at that same site and more stations down the road, so that yes, certainly fix it as fast as you possibly can, but give other options to the customer as well, so that they can, and let them, and steer them there from the start, right? So they don't have to experience, finding out a charger is broken when they arrive. They don't get sent there to begin with. They get sent somewhere else where there's abundant charging options.
Corey, I was wondering if you could jump in here with some perspective on what the charging network needs the most now and in the future.
I mean, I think both Marcy and Seth have gotten at it, which is really just having a good customer experience. When you're talking to friends or family about buying an EV, thinking about buying an EV or driving an EV, they aren't going down the laundry list of why a charger doesn't work. It just doesn't work, right? And when you've been driving gas cars for 10 years or your entire life, you never have those type of different experiences. On the other hand, I think we're focusing on public charging here, but there is a home charging element to say, how can we take as an industry charging from being what is perceived as a net negative or disadvantage to an advantage? Alex talked a little bit about the iPhone example around how you look at an electric vehicle. My dad drives an EV every day. There's a lot of topping off. There's a lot of go use a public charging network, go home, use the charger to kind of fuel back up, and then drive the next day. In terms of kind of a vision on a policy side, I think first it's spending the money that's already been allocated in many of these states. So for those of you who aren't aware, a lot of the money that was put aside for EV charging has yet to be obligated or even constructed. Really, you're looking at just a fraction of the overall $5 billion as a part of the NEVI program that's actually been built out. And then other money as a part of the CFI program is up in limbo currently. So meeting those kind of state plans, of which a lot of these states want the money to kind of build out, and I think an article from Politico noted that 40 states have already resubmitted plans under the new NEVI guidance last month saying we want to build out our state charging networks. These are red states, blue states, purple states. So getting the money out there and getting those charging stations built. And then longer term, when speaking with different research groups such as your own, Ash, what we hear from the experts is rural charging remains a challenge, right? We're seeing now higher utilization and interest in urban and suburban areas, but it's still hard without incentives to meet some of that rural charging need. And then medium and heavy is going to be a challenge too. So it's almost two different phases. It's the phase to kind of build out the network, and then looking forward, how do we meet those gaps in the system?
Gotcha. And then one question I had for Alex. You mentioned earlier that a large percentage of BMW drivers charging occurs at home. I'm curious, what are the main purposes of them charging in public?
I think it depends really on the respective customers' kind of daily behavior, driving behavior, right? I mean, some of them take long distance trip and that's the only time they would use public charging. Sometimes it's people living in apartments and don't have a home charging opportunity. Sometimes it's just out of convenience, right? Because I'm here anyway and then there's a convenience store or a grocery store next to where I need to go, or I need to go to the convenience store and there's a charging station next to that, and I'll just use it and top it off. So I think we're always looking at this from an average perspective. So the 85-25% split, it's on average everyone, but obviously you have the extremes on both ends who do nothing else but. And again, I think it's going to be important that we drive all the use cases forward and that they're all convenient to the customers, and then they can pick and choose and they can even adapt, right? I mean, if you go there every week and the next week you do something differently, but because you have the opportunity, then exactly that's what they should go for.
Just chiming in here too, certainly that multifamily can't home charge experience is a large and growing segment of the customer base, and that's what we're looking to meet. But there's also rapidly electrifying rideshare, where they really do need to charge away from home for their work. And then autonomous vehicles as well, increasingly on the scene, autonomous electric vehicles, where there is no home. There's a lot, but there's no driveway with home charging. So those two use cases are super important as well, and on the rise pretty dramatically.
I think I want to add one thing, Marcy, to the point around the actual, not just use case of chargers or need for chargers, but that the industry is meeting that need. According to Perrin, which is a research analyst group, EV charging in the US is expected to grow this year 20% year on year. And that's really impressive. That's something really to be excited about. And I think when you've looked at EV sales in Europe, for example, historically, the sales came before the charging in the public network. And so it's going to take a little bit of time for reality and the perception of reality to kind of meet. But I think industry is responding to that even without the incentives. And with ride-hail needing charging, you look at New York City, for example, there are tons of Revels and also tons of Fisker Oceans and a bunch of ride-hailing on the streets. There's even more charging needed, both on the L2 side as well as fast charging.
And so, Marcy, you mentioned autonomous vehicles. I'm curious what EVgo and IONNA are thinking in terms of future-proofing your charging stations for commercial vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and the like.
Yeah, autonomous electric vehicles tend to lend themselves a little bit more to dedicated hub charging type experience, which still needs to be fast because those are still quick turn use cases, right? They need to get every minute, literal minute that they're not delivering a ride is lost revenue for them. And so sure, overnight level 2 charging could be in the mix, but they really need fast charging as well, and maybe, primarily. So that hub experience, a little bit less reliant or needing to rely on amenities, because it's not, there's not, that the driver is a little bit different. There's no driver, but there's maybe an attendant to the vehicle, right? So those types of elements are a little bit different, but ultimately abundant, available, fast. Those are still, that's just uniform in what's needed, and then the hubs being placed, where those fleets tend to need to recharge in order to get right back on the road. So those are kind of the features that you would look for serving that type of charging need. A little bit different, but fundamentally similar.
Yeah, I mean, for us, look, I think 80% roughly of our investment that we're doing right now is inside of metropolitan areas. And when we site locations, typically we're trying to, what we call stack use cases, to be able to meet not just consumer vehicles, but also fleet, rideshare, autonomous. It becomes something at scale. And so everything we're looking for is, hey, how do we make sure that we're inside of a major metropolitan area, as you have folks that maybe are in high rises that don't have home charging, or they are commuters that need charging, but you're also close proximity to a major interstate for folks that are driving through a city on a road trip. And I think going back to utilization and a sustainable business in the long term, all of this is tied to how do you drive more folks to these sites, and you do that by stacking use cases. So whether it's autonomous or any of these other segments, it's building a site that can serve multiple different facets of the industry.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It reminds me of the early days of our partnership with General Motors and their Maven fleet. It wasn't autonomous then, but it was rideshare. And we did have a fair number of mixed use, where some portions of the charging array were meant for dedicated charging for those drivers, and then others were public, and that'll probably continue as well.
All right, and I think we're running out of time here, so we're going to close it out with just one lightning round question. What is one innovation or development that you're excited about that you think might change the charging landscape over the next 10 years? Why don't we start with Alex?
From my point of view, I think in public charging, it's going to be something like reservation or waitlist management, just as a peace of mind to the customer.
I think when we all stop talking about charging as just the charging piece, then I think we've solved charging.
I'm going to cheat and say batteries, being able to take the charge quicker. I think the cars are getting better and better and being capable of actually utilizing 250 kW, 350 kW and up charging, and that'll make the experience more seamless.
I was going to joke and say wireless charging, but I'm not sure the sarcasm would get picked up on, so I'm just stating it sarcastically. But yes, I agree. Just getting that charging experience that we've been describing this entire panel is really, really important to crack and be able to deliver. And beyond that, everything that drives towards that seamless experience, auto charge, plug and charge, everything that eliminates the driver's need to think about it, plan around it, make any kind of calls or encounter any kind of customer service, just plugging in and walking away to grab their coffee. Those are the types of innovations that we're working on, and it's not as sexy as like a one thing. Wireless charging would be super exciting, but as a concept, because it seems new and shiny, but it's all these little behind the scenes things that really improve the customer's experience.
So important. Okay, that's all very exciting.
What's yours, Ash?
Mine?
Yeah.
I think I'm really excited about autonomous electric vehicles and what solutions we're going to have for charging those. Yeah, all right, so thank you so much, panelists. You've given us a lot to think about, and let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ash, and all the panelists for bringing clarity to complex world of EV infrastructure.